Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to the panel discussion around data and cybersecurity. My name is Dhiman. I'm the Managing Director for Experian in Southeast Asia. For those who don't know Experian, we are one of the world's leading information services companies. We deal heavily in data-centric solutions to drive actionable insights for our clients. And because of that wealth of data, we really talk very heavily around data and cybersecurity. It won't surprise you to know that we are attempted to be hacked very regularly and very often by fraudulent actors. Joining me on stage today, we have a fairly diverse panel from a range of industries. And I'd just like to ask them to introduce themselves and just go down the line. So maybe Stuart, you can start.
Sure. Hi everyone, Stu Mort. I'm the CTO for cybersecurity within Optus Business. My role is to bring 25 years of security experience from the British government all the way through to CISO roles, consulting, to our big customer base across Australia, doing thought leadership in cybersecurity and helping our customers uplift their security baseline to protect their businesses.
Hi, I'm Pauline. I'm from SATS. My role is to look after technology for SATS, and technology includes the IT, cybersecurity, IoT, and all the autonomous vehicles, etc. So maybe what is SATS, in case you're wondering, we are the people who work at the airport to move your bags, make sure your plane is clean, and we are the people who cook the food for you on the plane.
Good afternoon, my name is David Shephard. I'm the Regional Vice President for Bitglass. We're a security software vendor existing in a market or in a category that the market defines as CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker. We help our customers to protect their data when it moves outside of the firewall.
Hello everyone, I'm Nicole. I'm the VP of Fraud and Risk at a company called Go-Jek from Indonesia. So how many of you guys have ridden on a Go-Jek before? Or been to Indonesia and seen these motorbikes weaving through traffic? Yeah, so that's what our company does. As a lot of you guys might have heard, we're also doing some international expansion, so hopefully some of you will have heard of us, Go-Jek in Singapore over the course of the next few months. So in Go-Jek's capacity, I'm currently based out of Jakarta, Indonesia, and I oversee all anti-fraud, anti-risk measures for the company.
Thanks, Nicole, and welcome panelists. So just to set the scene a little before I start to ask the panelists some questions, I think quite often when we think of data and cybersecurity, we think of the enterprise. But at the end of that data and cybersecurity is quite often a consumer. And at Experian, we recently enlisted some research to really understand what does data and cybersecurity really mean to the consumer. And one or two of the really key themes that came out of that was that there is this huge balance between data privacy and the risk of fraud and the want for consumers to get more convenient transactions. And we just heard from the other panel around the rise of digital banking. You know, a couple of stats to give you. 80% of consumers would want to reuse their data of the ones we surveyed when they transact with new businesses. So you see single sign-ons around Facebook and Google to help make that more convenient. And the tolerance for fraud is also very different when we look by different markets. It's very staggering to see that people in countries like Singapore are absolutely not tolerant to fraud. So it's a business imperative that enterprises deal, prevent, and detect fraud. Whereas businesses in more emerging markets, the consumers there are more tolerant of fraud and would accept a level of fraud in exchange for greater convenience, which in our view won't last forever. So with that said, maybe just to, again, level set a little, as you've all introduced, you all come from fairly different industries. What would you say data in the traditional sense and security around data means to each of you? Perhaps, Nicole, you can start.
So prior to coming to Southeast Asia, I worked at a few tech companies in the Valley. And after coming here, and I've been at Go-Jek for a little over a year, we've noticed some stark differences in how our consumers view the privacy of their own data. I think in Silicon Valley, a lot of the consumers there have had the luxury of having so many digital apps be bombarded in their face and have taken a lot of their data and done very unscrupulous things with their data over the course of the many years. And so I've noticed that in the Valley, within our customer base, people are usually a lot better educated around what to give away, denying certain permissions, and that offers a very interesting check and balance towards certain unscrupulous tech companies that might want all of your data, right? In Southeast Asia, and this is something that our CTO has pointed out before as well, for many people, when they download Go-Jek for the first time, it's probably the first time they've downloaded any app on the first smartphone that they have obtained. And so implicit in that is a lot of trust that they're placing on a company like Go-Jek. Our job is to deliver them from point A to point B. And we need minimum data to do our job. But at the very least, we'll know where they live, we'll know what food they like to eat. So when it comes to data, and our philosophy at Go-Jek, from day one, it's always been get as little, as minimally as possible to do our jobs, to get somebody from point A to point B, and nothing more. And that's been our philosophy for it from day one. Now that said, I think within the company, and I think a lot of the folks from our teams are here in the audience as well, as they'll tell you, the way that we treat customer privacy within the company is very, very stringent, almost to a crazy level. One of our Go-Jek mottos is, be a scientist. And so in every business discussion, in every meeting you'll go to, data, analytics, and insights, and producing evidence from our millions and millions of customers, that's going to be the loudest voice within any room and informing how we at Go-Jek make our decisions. And I think if you wanted proof of that, you can look at how our company is organized, right? In addition to your traditional business intelligence teams that look at data and perform straightforward data analytics, we also have a huge data science team based here in Singapore, actually, and that team is currently hiring. We also have a data engineering team, a information cybersecurity team divided into a red team and a blue team. And all of those teams have invested a substantial amount of resources and time and energy into adopting the bleeding edge technologies in order to understand a lot of the big data problems that Go-Jek has.
Great, and I think the two things you mentioned there were around trust and education also for the consumers to really drive more data security. Stuart, how about at Optus, and what does it mean to you in the markets you worked in?
Yeah, sure. So Optus, we're the second biggest telco in Australia, part of the owned by Singtel here locally. For us, we're carrying our customers' data from individuals using your cell phones, your broadband at home, through to our big customers, the big four banks in Australia. We're their telco provider. So we're carrying customers' data across our network all the time. So we've got a responsibility to layer security around that network and protect it. Not just protecting the confidentiality of that information, but shaping network traffic to ensure our customers still have availability. They still get access to that data, they still got access to their comms. And one of the most important things we do in Optus is stream the Premier League football across Australia. So, making sure that it doesn't matter. I'm a Swansea City fan, and we just got relegated, so it's not so important to me. But, the telcos are changing. We're now a streaming provider of sport. We're going to stream the World Cup across Australia. That's a huge responsibility. So the data we're involved in as a telco isn't just carriage. It's about streaming content all the time. And the other data we're responsible for is we've got huge telemetrics of what individuals are doing. So we can now market that data to our customers. Where do people go, the foot traffic around the mall and things like that. We're actually monetizing that information for our customers to enable them to sell more within their environments.
Great. And Pauline, for SATs?
For SATs, I think it is down to the same principles that the other two panelists said: trust, how we handle the data, and particularly in the airline, the travel industry, and the food industry that SATs handle, data is very important for us to be able to bring you the convenience that you want. So when you, for example, when you travel, if we know which bag belongs to you, or who belongs to which bag, if you want to say it the other way. You really want to know where your bags are. You want to ensure your bags arrive where you are heading. Now, so how do I ensure that, I can assure you and tell you where your bags are if you lose your bags, or for whatever reason it missed a connection? Or when you get onto a plane, how do I best know what is your preferred food choice? or your preferred seat. So things like that, all this involves data about you. Therefore, there's a very important balance, or it's actually a fine line between what data I collect to provide you or to give you your preferences and the convenience you want, vis-a-vis data privacy that you say, hey, I don't want you to know. So I think a lot then comes down to trust and how do we allow an open platform or some mechanism for you to tell us, hey, I would like you to do this for me. This is very important to me. I don't want you to know. And we are then, we know then, okay, this is not a service that we should provision for you. So I think it's how do the ability to communicate, the ability to know whether you allow that data to be shared. But then I think it's a convenience that everybody wants. How do we layer? How do we protect it? How do we secure it? I think is where the difference lies.
So the balance again between convenience, but also respect for privacy. And finally, David.
So I said to Dev that I'd probably answer this question a little differently and talk more about how we handle our customers' data. So we're a cloud security company and we focus on data protection. So when we're talking to customers, they've already established the notion or the concept of their data has value. Okay, and they're already accepting of the fact that their data is moving outside of the firewall into cloud apps, and they don't really know where it is. And sometimes they don't really know how it's being accessed or where it lives. So the first thing we do with the customer is really try and help them understand, what data do they care about the most? Because it's going to be pretty impossible to protect everything against everything. So we've got to take a risk-based approach and start with what matters most. So we kind of give them a bit of a view of, what applications are in use and where their data might be living. And then we think about how the users are accessing it and from what types of devices. And what we're learning and what they're accepting is that the data's outside the firewall, so the perimeter really, the concept of the perimeter is going or has gone. The endpoint's becoming increasingly unmanaged through BYO, and honestly, like cloud and mobile are just driving this massive change in the way we work. So the technologies that they've relied on for years to protect their data just don't feature in the new kind of enterprise IT. So they're having to kind of like refactor their thinking and come at these problems with different ideas. Because ultimately, if you don't manage the endpoint, you can't secure it there. And if you don't have it inside the firewall, you can't secure it there. So it's fast becoming unmanaged endpoint, public internet, and the cloud. And that's something that people haven't really gone through before. So this is the kind of transformation that everyone's going through. And whether customers think they're in the cloud or not, they're probably in the cloud. And that's the first thing they realize when they talk to us. And then they need to think about what they do. And if I can just extend on that.
I'd ask an extension of that, which is how do you then help them manage that risk, which I think you're coming to.
Yeah, well, the good thing for us is if they're talking to us, they're already accepting of the fact that data has value and they need to protect it. I think this kind of imperfect storm of adoption of cloud, rise of mobile, and then increasing legislation is really kind of forcing it to the top of the agenda. Notifiable Data Breach Act in Australia, GDPR, with European citizen data. People know they have to do something about this. They can't pretend they don't now. So we really have to try and protect the data where it lives, protect the data as it's accessed, and try and kind of protect the flow of data. Because people used to talk about the fact that data had legs. Well, with cloud and mobile, data has wings. And it's really, really hard to keep pace with an environment which is changing constantly.
Thanks, David. One of the other themes that we hear all the time is the rise of competition in all industries, the rise of disruption, and the need for enterprises to understand their consumers more than ever. Stuart, I think you talked about the data that's being thrown off some of these actions and transactions that you're seeing. How do you at Optus balance the kind of risk but also the need to give customers a better experience by leveraging some of that data?
Yeah, it's really important. Well, one of the bugbears I have in the cyber industry for CISO security professionals is there's too much of a barrier to the business. They think in terms of threat, not in terms of risk. Our job as security professionals are there to be the guardrails. We have to enable a business to go where the business wants to go, and we need to support it with layering security around that. So as I look at the risk framework of what we're doing, I can't get in the way of Optus embracing new technology and delivering that technology to our customers I have to wrap my security layer around it to enable that I maintain that confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If you're in a CISO or security role and you're saying no to your business, you're in the way of your business. Get out of that way. Deliver security for your business. Be that guardrail and not the barrier. And that's what I have to do day to day. I have to go and sit down. One of my mantras is that when we work in cybersecurity, it's got a very techie name. We aren't technology professionals. We're business professionals. Our real job in security is about share price, brand value, and reputation, not about bits and bytes. So get to understand your business, understand how it's innovating, embracing disruptive technology, and help the business secure it to go forward. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah, great point. And at Experian, obviously, given the consumer data that we work with, we have extensive programs that train every level of the organization in data security. Because unfortunately, the fraudsters don't email the security teams. They email the lowest or the weakest link in the chain, a shared service center person who wouldn't be suspecting. So it's really important, as you said, that reputation comes into this and everybody in an organization is kept aware of the risks. Nicole, how about at Go-Jek? How do you balance the kind of data that's being thrown off some of the transport events and how you then balance that with the need to protect privacy and the consumer?
Great question. Like I mentioned before, when it comes to our philosophies around data acquisition, we only obtain and we only track as minimally as is necessary to get a human being a package, a food package, or ever since GoPay came into the picture, some money from point A to point B. And because we're in such an interesting industry, we're in ride sharing, we're going against these transportation and taxi companies that have been around for decades and decades, and to a certain extent have a very different MO and style of doing business. That in an ecosystem where a lot of this technology, a lot of these regulations are still lying on shaky ground, it means that we have to be extra careful. And we understand that as we roll out our Go-Jek drivers and as we roll out our go-kart drivers into the ecosystem, no matter what the region is and no matter what the product vertical is, there's always going to be a cost of doing business. And so without going into greater detail about what that cost entails, it becomes the jobs of internal teams like our engineering teams and our analytics teams to, as clearly as we can, define what those costs can be and try to minimize that. And at the same time, of course, maximize driver safety, customer safety, their data privacy, and still be able to grow and still be able to operate in these very interesting regions.
Makes sense. And for Pauline, for SATs, how do you balance the experience piece that you mentioned earlier and the security piece?
I think maybe let me share about the data privacy and how we handle data within the organization. So while we want to provide the convenience to our customer, internally within the organization, we need data to function. We need data to be able to provide the services to our customers out there. So I think it's the same principle of one when a piece of data is given to any business unit or any of the staff. Is this data needed? I think down to what was just said that, I should only give you data that is needed. So I think it's how we share data. And sometimes I don't really need to share the identity of the person. Right? If I need to retrieve your bag, I'll just give them the bag code and you still can find the bag. So there are many ways of enabling the business to provide convenience, to provide the service, if we just look at the data that is needed and filter it accordingly. So it's just the devil's always in the detail. Of course, it's very convenient to just throw the stuff, everything, and then there's, and half the time you really don't need the person's name, the person's address. You don't need all those things, and don't share those. So I think as cybersecurity or IT professionals, it is our responsibility to see how to enable the business to do their work with the information that's needed. And very often in our database, we have a lot more data than they need. So if we do it right, you won't run into a lot of all this data protection or privacy issue.
Okay. Just a quick point of housekeeping. We're going to take questions from the floor in about 10 minutes, so please send in your questions using the instructions behind me. David, I'm just going to put you on the spot. As an expert as an expert in this field that advises clients day in, day out, what do you see as the emerging or the biggest cybersecurity threats in Asia Pacific?
I don't think I've ever been called an expert before, so that's kind. So my role actually is not to be an expert in cyber, it's to be kind of an expert in understanding my customers' problems and just seeing if I can help them solve them. I think there's two things that we're coming up against which is going to be a challenge for everyone, like in the customer industry, in the vendor industry, in the telco industry. And the first of which is we all get scared to death and do nothing. Because every vendor out there is telling you that 0 days, APTs, nation states, you don't have a chance. And you might, as a mid-sized business, look at your IT organization and your budget and just feel like you should give up. And I don't think we should give up. I think we should do what we can reasonably do. So the challenge here is, can we manage risk to within acceptable levels at some cost? And where those lines goes between you and your business. So I think, don't do nothing, do what you can reasonably do. If you're not in the infrastructure management business, go to the cloud. Okay, if you're not in the business of feeding and watering applications and keeping them current, go to the cloud. And that's really why we exist. And then the second thing is we just get drowned by data and information about breaches and hacks and regulation and compliance, that it just becomes white noise. And you stop paying attention to it. And it's like the first time you watch a news story and it's kind of shocking, and it rocks you, and then the more you watch it, the less affected you are. I think there's a little bit of that, where we're just kind of fighting through this white noise about breach, and so people are just kind of doing nothing because they don't know what to do, or they don't think it's going to matter anyway.
And you mentioned breach. I think 2017 was a bit of a watershed year, Stuart, for data security, cybersecurity. What's the view that you have at Optus around how an organization should set itself up to really detect and prevent these instances before they occur?
Yeah, going back to 2017, what I witnessed happening was that the cyber threat became more of a board issue. I'm presenting to more boards at the moment, the chair, et cetera, on cyber, because they want to raise their awareness. I like to say to them, if you're reading in the newspaper about a breach or experiencing one, you're probably 15 years too late addressing cyber. You should have been doing it long. But so what I'm seeing is more the boards engaging in cyber, want to engage with Optus to work out how they protect their environment. And as I said before, they're starting to see it as a business issue. One of the other things I'm seeing, and I've been talking about this for many years, is that your CISO shouldn't be in IT. Get your CISO out of IT. I'm seeing more of the big organizations in Australia shifting their CISO roles into the chief risk officer area, or independent reporting lines, so they can get closer to the board and deliver that message. The security message isn't delivered through IT, it's delivered independently. I'm also seeing a convergence of information security. I hate the term cybersecurity, by the way, that's a personal thing. Information security and physical security converging and working together to protect the organizations. So that's the watershed I'm seeing. It's more of a board level, there's more integration around security, and it's pulling it away into more of a risk function than a technology function.
Got it. So on to slightly happier themes. We've talked a lot about information security and breaches and data hacks, etc. Nicole, at Go-Jek, you guys have just announced that you will raise $500 million to drive the expansion that you talked about in your introduction. How are you going to scale that business in a way that respects all the principles that you've talked around data governance and data privacy?
Great question. The TLDR version to that answer is, because we're a huge technology company and our infrastructure is built on, the last time I checked, over 300 microservices, where you can spend a week just cobbling some things together and it works perfectly, seamlessly, and with as little bugs as possible. So that gives us the agility from a data and from a technological perspective to be able to go into these regions and still offer the same premium products that we give people in Indonesia. And so to Dev's earlier point, yes, we recently did announce our international expansion plans. We'll be going into 4 regional countries: Singapore, as I'm sure you've heard, Philippines, Vietnam, as well as Thailand. So from a data governance and data acquisition strategy, again, it doesn't change from region to region, with the small variations where we need to adjust things and adjust our policies, because again, we are very conscious of local market sentiments in every single one of these regions and regulatory constraints and keeping our stakeholders happy. Aside from those minor tweaks, because we're coming from a perspective where we value our customer privacy so much, it doesn't entail that much tweaking. And the data that we acquire in Vietnam versus in Thailand versus in the Philippines versus our historical data that we've acquired and learned from in Indonesia, that is not going to get cross-pollinated, because that's fundamentally not how we run the technological side of our business.
Makes sense. And Pauline, a similar kind of question for you. With more access to air travel than ever before, budget carriers coming into the region at a huge velocity, what do you think are the biggest themes that you're looking at as airline travel gets more and more common and into the market?
I think in the travel industry, where you actually do see exponential growth, and maybe just to give you some of the projections, just Singapore alone, today we handle in Changi Airport 1 to Terminal 1 to Terminal 4 about 60 million passengers. With Terminal 5 coming on board in 2025, 2030, we're looking at 125 million. So that's the kind of projections we're looking at just in Singapore. And if you look at the region, it's even bigger. So the question then lies in, now if we really are handling so many people's data, where would again be the best way to secure it? And it goes beyond just securing your data, because we really need to know a lot more with that kind of volume to ensure travel safety. Yep, there is cybersecurity, there's cyber terrorism, etc. We need to really have a lot more border controls. There's a lot more control of who actually goes up the plane, who you are, what's really in your bag, whose bag is this. So, the entire realm of travel and the amount of data that goes around within a country and how it gets connected across the various regions becomes, actually, there's a big explosion of data. And this is important to collect. It is important to understand what this data means and how to really protect every single one of us the minute you travel, wherever you are.
Yeah, and the common statistic that gets mentioned, sorry to repeat it, is that more data has been produced in the last 5 years than the whole of mankind, which is quite staggering, and we're just getting started with some of this stuff around the world. We'll go to the questions from the floor with the time we have left. I think it's only right we start with the inevitable blockchain question. So thank you to whoever wrote that in, anonymous. I guess to the team here, what are your thoughts around blockchain and decentralized ledgers and how that promotes security?
We spoke about this earlier on, and Stuart and I both said, well, we're not experts in blockchain security, so I'd hate to stand up here and pretend to be one. I think any time you're raising the barrier to the adversary, it's a good thing. And by decentralizing processes or, basically just decentralizing a process, it makes it much, much harder for it to be compromised, and you build in some safeguards. So I'm yet to really get into deep conversations with my customers around blockchain and decentralized security. I think they've got some other things that they could be doing first and faster, and I'd get to that as the next question. And now I'll hand to Stuart to not answer you.
Oh, nice slope of shoulders there. So my question back to that is, what's the business problem I'm going to be solving by using blockchain and decentralization? That's the first question to answer. If I use this technology, deploy it in some way, what am I actually using it for in protecting my organization? Yes, I see how it works in cryptocurrencies and all the rest. I understand technology, but why would I use it? What benefit would it bring me at this point in time to protecting my organization?
Maybe I can chip in on the blockchain and security bit. So in SATS, we are looking really at blockchain to look at food traceability and food safety. So for the food that you eat, if we use blockchain, right, I know the source. And if I can trace your food from farm to fork, it will really give you much better food safety, food security. Similarly, in the area of air cargo. So rather than today, you see all the papers floating around, if blockchain is applied and we can see again the cargo moving from source to destination. That again, that decentralization approach will definitely promote security. And this data decentralization will really be put to good use.
Great. Well done, guys. I know that's not an easy question. I get asked it all the time. The reason I asked you is I wanted an answer to use next time I get asked. Maybe something slightly more innovative and interesting around data science. So Nicole, maybe you could talk a little bit about what Go-Jek is doing specifically around the data science projects that you mentioned. You have a team in Singapore currently engaged in.
Sure. We have a pretty sizable data science team here in Singapore. The challenges that they're tackling, I think without going into, again, detail, you'll probably be very familiar with them. It comes around optimizing transportation, optimizing allocations, optimizing pricing so that we can keep the prices as cheap as possible, but at the end of the day, still pay our drivers a very fair fare. Our data science team, similar to our fraud team and our security teams, it's built in a very interesting way. All of our technical teams are decentralized, kind of like blockchain, maybe not. There is a central team that will roll out the best practices, the training for people in the data science team, for people in the fraud engineering team, and then after a couple months, after they pass a certain standard of excellence, we'll actually embed those people in a forward deployed way in a lot of other teams at Go-Jek. And you want that to happen because your product team that's working on GoFood, that team is going to know about GoFood's optimization, cost, time, savings problems a lot better than any regular data scientist would know sitting behind 3 fully stacked monitors, right? And so over the course of the past few years, as we scaled our engineering team from, I think, 20 people 2.5 years ago to now hundreds and hundreds of people, we found that this model has worked really well. And again, all of our engineering teams are hiring. Please send your resumes over to hiring@gojek.com. I actually was really excited to talk about the blockchain aspect. In Go-Jek's capacity, we've actually seen a lot of these blockchain startups come across and pitch to us. A couple of the interesting ones that I remember was one that was working on network security in a distributed way, IPFS. There was another one that was looking at VPN tunneling, but doing it in a decentralized way. For my domain and for my scope, we've come across some blockchain companies that are doing credit scoring, or blockchain companies that aim to put your hashed consumer data on the blockchain so that you, as the end user, can control it, and then someone else can just query it, given your permissions. So all of that, it's all very exciting, it's all very promising. At the end of the day, I have to tie it to whether or not these technologies and their promises are usable within the Go-Jek infrastructure. So as I mentioned earlier in our chat, at Go-Jek every day, we see over millions, if not tens of millions, of transactions that we'll have to process over just a couple seconds. As far as I know, on the most popular public blockchain network, Ethereum, right now their capabilities are slightly over 20 or so transactions per second. Right? So you take our constraints, which is millions and millions of transactions, and you then scale it down into reality. These things are, at the moment, not feasible. But at the same time, I think I don't speak for the company in this instance, but just coming from a technologist background, I think what it portends and what it promises, and the very natural incentives network and the very natural incentives engineering and checks and balances that it brings into ecosystems like fraud, where human beings can really F things up for you. It's so fundamentally exciting. And with some of the newer ideas that have come across, like these cryptographic primitives, my friend was telling me the other day about this idea of zero knowledge proofs. I think it's also new, it's also exciting, and I definitely think that within the course of our lifetime, we'll see a lot of these things live up to their potential. And so on our end, I think we'll be listening very intently, and we're excited to just see a lot more of these ideas.
Got it. And the leading question, let's go to that one now, but let's look at it slightly differently. David, I think you really wanted to answer this one, which is around what do you think, we've talked a lot about threats, but what do you think is the biggest opportunity for security across Asia?
I wanted to answer it about threats, though. So, I really want the answer to this to be some like end-of-level boss, like from some sort of cyber movie, when you think about the biggest threat. But I don't think it is. I think it's some complacency. and also the speed at which we move. I think we just have to go faster. I think we're trying to protect a landscape which is changing shape, daily, weekly, monthly, and yet we're working through projects which are taking months or years to conclude, and we're trying to protect an environment with a 5-year plan, and yet we don't know what we're going to look like in 6 weeks or 6 months' time. I think we have to change the way we approach some of these projects. And the second thing is, again, coming back to raising the bar to the adversary, I think we can just collectively do a better job of fixing our cyber hygiene. Like, we worry about stuff we can't do anything about, and yet we don't deal with the stuff that we can do something about. I think we should try and go back to the stuff that we know we should be doing better and do it better. And if you get popped by a 0-day, by a nation state, you are never really going to prevent that anyway.
Anything to add, Stuart?
Just the single biggest threat, and I think people forget about this, but it's actually the carbon unit that exists between the chair and the keyboard. That's you and me. It's the human factor. We still see the figures of the 80-20 split. 80% of breaches are from an insider. It's people, they make mistakes, they're easily targeted. If I want to attack an organization, I'm not turning to tech first, I'm turning to the human being. I'm calling you up, I'm social engineering you. Because sometimes that's the easiest way into an organization, not by the keyboard, by the human. So we've got to focus, and you touched on it earlier, education and awareness across the organization. Everybody needs to be responsible. A mature organization doesn't assume that there's this magic security team that makes everything secure. If you work in HR, for example, you should be asking the security team, what are they doing to protect your data in HR, et cetera, in marketing. So we need to do that, drive that education awareness from the home and into the business, because the single biggest threat from my perspective and my experience is the carbon unit.
I might just jump in on that, because there's a really good illustration of this recently. Like, everyone sees those silly little games on Facebook that pop up, what's your rock star name? And guess what? It's always your mother's maiden name with your first pet. Why do you think people want you to play that game? What are the social engineering questions they'd love to have the answers to so they can spoof some sort of security step up? So don't play silly games on Facebook that ask about your mother's maiden name, and give them your favorite color and your first car whilst you're at it. Just hand the keys.
Yeah, there's a really cool video on YouTube, Jimmy Fallon, where he's interviewing people in the street and asking them for their password, and they're saying, of course I won't give it to you. So then he comes at it a different way, and they're giving up that sort of information pretty freely. I think we've got time for one last question. There's a question here around any examples of where we've helped to drive consumer empowerment with data, and Nicole, you mentioned around consumer consent. I can talk a bit about what Experian is doing in this field. As you know, in the Southeast Asia markets, there is a huge problem around the unbanked, the underbanked, and the financially excluded. And we are super passionate about how we help tackle that social problem through data. So by enabling people to share their data, we empower them to get into the financial system, because guess what? Now we have information we can use to make lending, credit, or other financial decisions. So it's something that's very close to home, but I wonder if anybody else has examples of how they've driven consumer empowerment through data.
I think we're in Optus, I mentioned this earlier, we're using our data. There's two areas, so let me answer this two ways. We're using the data to empower our customers to get more information on what their customers are doing. So foot traffic around malls is a good example. We own the Wi-Fi across those environments, and we're doing that. The other thing, and I'm going to blend into the data science question a little bit as well. We've got masses of data as a telco, huge amounts of data. We're actually using that data and releasing it to the educational, the academic institutions to drive research on it, to see if we can get ahead of the game in preventing cyber attacks. What does all that data we have tell us? What can we mine from that data to help us build a picture that we can then share with our customers and who are mobile phone users and broadband users at home to protect their environment? So we're actually driving research. We're partnering with universities across Australia, and we've won a $50 million grant from the Australian government. And so we're actually opening up our data to help the consumer and help businesses protect themselves.
Sounds great. Any more for any more? Or?
I think consumer education education is actually not something that companies should do and then publicize. It should actually be a fundamental responsibility and a first priority for any company, especially companies that claim to be a technology company. That consumer education has to be ever ongoing, and it needs to be something that every company devotes a lot of time and energy into doing. And you're not going to reap the rewards, unfortunately, within 1 year or within your stint at the company. So for example, I think all of us here remember 15 years ago, all of those Nigerian prince scam emails. They were huge, and they actually entrapped a lot of people. But how many of you guys in the audience today would still fall for those scams? Oh, one brave soldier here. Well, hopefully all of you guys have seen them. You are now very attuned to these phishing scams. Well, unfortunately, with the advent of, as I think you were mentioning this a couple minutes ago, with the advent of these new technologies and different technological interfaces that people might not be as familiar with, and in many regions you'd be surprised to find a smartphone is one of those very new interfaces that people are still learning to use. So for many, many regions on Earth, we're seeing this Cambrian explosion of people learning how to deal with new technologies, how to deal with giving away and managing their data online. And if you're a company that interfaces with those demographics, it is your sole responsibility before you ask for any data, before you try to make money on these demographics, to actually gradually educate these people without any expectations for rewards.
Thanks, Nicole. And our 40 minutes are up, so that's the end of the panel. I'd like to say a huge thank you to the panelists for sharing such great experience. I'll leave you kind of with one thought, which is, and we talked about this earlier, companies are not doing enough to talk to each other about what they're doing on fraud and cybersecurity and risk. Rest assured, the fraudsters are communicating and talking to each other and sharing how they're managing to break the system. So one of the key ways I think we will tackle this problem is through greater collaboration across all companies and all the people that are in this room. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great rest of the conference.